This is Toho, a series of games known for its bullet hells and vibrant community. Now the thing I love the most about Toho are how these boss patterns, these spell cards, are a perfect blend between chaos and beauty. The symmetry, intricacy, and hypnotic effect of these patterns are just amazing. What are the techniques used to create these insane spectacles? In this video, I'll be attempting to recreate this spell card using my own custom particle system, showing you the journey into uncovering the beauty behind the bullets, as well as giving you some insights on how you can create these patterns for yourself. At least, that was the plan. You see, I was hit with trouble at the onset of the project. I analyzed the video frame by frame, but I just couldn't discern which bullets accelerated outwards versus staying in this grid formation. Feeling lost, I decided to check out an easier version of this spell card. Initially, I didn't see much difference, but just then, I saw something. At the corner of the screen, a clue to the puzzle. This sub-pattern contained the same elements, but due to the timing differences, I was able to see clearly how this one worked. With my newfound excitement, I took notes on how these sub-patterns worked and brainstormed ways I could replicate this on my own. But how do we take these notes and turn it into code? My particle system consists of three major components: the spawner, particles, and timer. While the spawners aren't necessarily required to create particles, they help immensely in determining the initial position and rotation of these bullets. The timer is in charge of determining when these particles get spawned. So yeah, this is cool and all, but lasers aren't particles. How am I supposed to get those onto the screen? See, what had happened was, before I started work on this project, I actually had to remove image support from my particle system. Simply put, the code was next to broken. And without image support, the laser beam is gonna look a bit more like a laser pointer. But that didn't stop me from still trying to implement this feature with what I had. This isn't enough, however. For us to faithfully recreate the spell card, we need to take a look at two more sub-patterns that seem to defy the odds. Take a look at these bullets. You know, when I first saw this, I thought I had to add more features to my particle system. I already had to add particle size and color over lifetime to get the lasers in these massive bullets to work well. But as I started work on these dancing bullets, it turns out I just need to play with the math that determines the directions these bullets shoot out. Now, for the sub-pattern that had me stumped since the beginning of this video. I originally took a look at this sub-pattern and assumed that there were two, maybe even three sub-patterns stacked on top of one another. But as I completed this staggered grid and started work on these bullets, it was to my surprise that this sub-pattern wasn't separated, but combined. It was this discovery that solidified the point that simple rules can lead to beautiful results. In fact, let's take a look at the final outcome.
I wanna conserve TP, I need to be careful with Telstra. Who would have thought, huh? I just need to be smart about playing the game.
Ganun nga yun, Joanne. Katulad ng tip mo, bang 5.
Pocket Kings is the second most powerful starting hand you could possibly be dealt in No Limit Hold'em, which is great, but for some reason, this hand can still create a lot of confusion for players. How many streets of value should you go for? How should you play on an ace-high board? How often is that ace going to pop on the flop in the first place? That's what we're going to talk about today. Let's get into the science of Pocket Kings. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Splitsuit, and welcome back to another video in the Science of Poker
What is
series,
up?
where we analyze popular starting hands from a technical point of view and give you tips for playing these hands better both pre-flop and post-flop. Today we're going to analyze Pocket Kings, an extremely powerful starting hand that you have to know how to play. You have to know how to play it pre-flop, how to play it post-flop, how to play the good spots, and also the bad ones, and that's what we're going to get into and talk about. Now before we get into the really technical analysis of this hand, let's try to understand why players tend to love and even sometimes hate Pocket Kings. So starting with why players tend to hate this hand. First is because you feel like you always run into aces pre-flop. Of course it doesn't, but sometimes, especially when you're running bad for a long period of time, it can feel like it always does. People can also hate Pocket Kings because it loses a huge amount of its value as soon as any ace hits on the flop, turn, or river. Losing with kings is tougher when it feels like it's almost guaranteed to win in the first place, and it can seem tricky to extract a lot of value in top set, especially when the board is so locked up. Right, if it comes king 7 deuce rainbow, it can be really tough to extract a bunch of value from your opponent, since what second best hands are they really going to be showing up with a huge ton of the time there. So while there are certainly some reasons to dislike kings, or maybe just dislike it in certain spots, there are plenty more reasons to love this hand. First and foremost is that it's always strong enough to stack off pre-flop, plus the stacks are incredibly deep, or villain is the world's biggest nit. I also love that Pocket Kings is going to flop an overpair or better a whopping 79% of the time, and also an unimproved overpair of kings is still strong enough to stack off with post-flop, although it certainly depends on the SPR. But whether you love or hate Pocket Kings, you still need to understand what to objectively expect with this hand. So first and foremost, it should obviously be a huge winning hand in your overall database, especially over a good sample size. You should expect lots of 3-betting, 4-betting, and 5-betting pre-flop given the opportunity to do so. You should definitely expect some pre-flop stack-offs with Pocket Kings, especially when stack sizes are more shallow or you're in later position with deeper stacks. You should expect lots of value betting post-flop and a general reluctance to fold unless the board texture gets extremely bad. And a small amount of the time, obviously that ace is going to pop on the flop, turn, or river, and in those situations you should typically expect to play it more passively. But the general idea of Pocket Kings, let's get into some of the technical analysis, and to do this we can open up Flopzilla Pro. In here we can plug in Pocket Kings over in the matrix and see how it hits across all possible flops right here in the center. And if we look first at smashes, which were just considered to be sets or better, we notice that's happening 12% of the time, which is exactly common for all starting pocket pairs. If we look also at how single pair hands are getting in there, things like overpairs are going to be the primary, and also pocket pairs below top pair for the times that there is an ace on board. And that's going to happen roughly the other percent of the time, so all combined we're looking at 100% hits here. If we also try to break down into some draws, can throw in flush draws, open straight draws, and gut shots as well, we notice that's happening roughly 4.5% of the time. So the major amount of hits here are going to be those one pair hands. Over pairs are massively prevalent, and then obviously we're going to have to deal with that ace a decent chunk of the time as well. And if you're looking for your nerdy fact of the day, here it is. Pocket Kings and Pocket Deuces are tied across all pocket pairs as being least likely to flop a straight flop. So looking at this technical analysis, there are essentially three major kind of outcomes that can happen. Board 1 is we flop an overpair with or without a redraw. Board 2, an ace hits on the board and we have second pair. Or board 3, we flop a set or better. And we're going to talk about post-flop tips for all of those in a moment, but let's start by talking about some pre-flop tips with Pocket Kings, just to make sure we make it to post-flop properly. So pre-flop tip number 1 with Pocket Kings is to just be aggressive. As a pure default, isolation rates, 3-bet, 4-bet, 5-bet, whatever it is, you don't really want to get into a habit of playing this hand really passively. It's not that you never do, but as a pure default, aggression is going to go a long way. And if you look at something like comparing Pocket Kings to Pocket Aces pre-flop, Pocket Aces is going to get slow played some percent of the time, Pocket Kings much less likely. The key difference is simply that Pocket Kings is more vulnerable than Pocket Aces. If you have kings and your opponent has a random ace-x hand, that has close to 30% equity against you. So letting those hands see a flop for free or very cheaply is not ideal. Tip number 2 is to make sure that you squeeze with this hand pre-flop, and that's 3-bet squeezing and even 4-bet squeezing. You really don't want to play this hand in a bunch of multi-way pots, and if you're in a squeeze situation where you have the opportunity to do so, by definition there's a possibility of it going multi-way, and if you just flat or play it passively, much more likely you have to go multi-way with it. Really don't want that. Heads-up scenarios are much better for Pocket Kings, and as such, squeeze away and get more value that way. Tip number 3 is kind of an obvious one, but almost never fold with kings pre-flop. If you're constantly trying to find hero folds with Pocket Kings, I would actively avoid it. Now, it's not to say that there aren't times to do so. Again, if stack depth is extremely deep and or your opponent is just so incredibly nitty and they're just really never ever going to get anything in pre-flop other than exclusively aces, fine. But if you're constantly trying to fold and play this hand super passively, or worse, folding pre-flop, you're doing yourself a massive disservice. I mean, if you're going to constantly fold the second best starting hand pre-flop, what the heck are you playing? You're probably way too nitty. That's definitely something you want to start fixing, like, now. Alright, so assuming you've played pre-flop well and you're getting the post-flop correctly, let's talk about some of those general board situations we were talking about earlier, starting with the times you flop and prepare with or without a redraw. Alright, so tip number one when you have Pocket Kings in the prepare post-flop is to understand that dry textures are massively favorable for you. Take a situation where you 3-bet with Pocket Kings pre-flop, your opponent calls, your overpair could have equity over 80% on safe textures, say 10-4-3, even 10-4-3 with a flush draw on it, just to be fair. Now, on textures with a lot of mid-range coordination, such as 9-8-7 with a flush draw, the equity of Kings is going to drop to just over 60%. And for side-by-side comparison, we have around 61% equity on a texture with an ace. In other words, an Ace-XX board and a 9-8-7 with a flush draw board gives you roughly the same amount of equity when you have Pocket Kings. Now, worst case scenario, your equity is going to be a little bit lower, around 55-ish if there's an ace and some mid-range connectivity, say an ace 9-8, something like that. But just kind of keep that in mind when you're getting really comfortable with your overpair. If there's a lot of mid-range coordination, that is good for you. Tip number two is to understand that Kings as an overpair post-flop is usually strong enough to extract 3 streets of value, even if the flush or straight draw gets there. Now, tip number three is that if the straight and flush draw both get there, typically that's a situation where you're going to have to slow down and you might only be able to extract 2 streets of value, so keep that in mind. And the final tip with the overpair is to be very unlikely to fold a post-flop if you end up facing a triple barrel. Now, this shouldn't be going to happen a ton of times, since you're not going to slow play a pre-flop very often, but let's just say your opponent needs a team on the flop or something like that. It's typically going to be one of those spots where if they do go bet, you're typically going to continue. If your opponent is extremely nitty or the texture is extremely awful, okay, fine, folding can definitely be a consideration, but as a pure default, if you find yourself in this spot, just get sticky and be very happy that it's a usually very profitable spot for you. Alright, so I think that hammers the overpair pretty well, but now let's switch gears into everyone's favorite spot when that damn ace hits. Now, as a pure default, if you have Pocket Kings and an ace hits on the flop, you should just play it passively, as a pure default. If you're looking for more information on this, or just generally playing as kind of like not under
it's a jungle.
I'll leave a link for NVIDIA and card right up there. Description box.
If I may ask, you wouldn't have happened to have seen any other soldiers around here, would you? There would have been a girl with them. No. Yes, we're actually looking for someone. Oh, really?
The board with a set of you go without saying how good you stacks. Section has been 4 straight board and obviously slow. So Pocket Kings.
Dun, 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 dun.
Sessions. Some permanent exercises focus on equity to getting success across every single street, car runouts, floating, auto profit, odd geometry, analysis. Skills between sessions. So, exercises in every work on post-op skills the right way between sessions. And today it's swimsuit.com/post.
Primates are notorious for their incredibly rogue intelligence stack. Grants them access to incredible advanced techniques such as dreams, coordinated team strategies, even bartering and trade. But primates are not the only faction in the intelligence stack. Cetacean, cephalopod, and birds also come off that can powerful damage dealing abilities.
Ooh, a heavenly gift.
Leveling up their
So those aren't on just DLC rewards.
Choice. Player vulnerable to rank 1 combat. In actuality, this often results in much less risky playthrough, as the player's intelligence opens up more options for them to progress that don't require winning in combat. This is especially true of the bird faction, as their ability to fly already allows them to quickly escape most unfavorable combat encounters. Today, we're going to discuss one of the two main intelligence-centered bird builds, the faction that contains crows, ravens, and magpies, the Corvid. This video is going to focus mostly on crows as an example, but generally what I say in this video should apply to most Corvids. First, let's discuss their stats, as well as the abilities and strategies that exemplify them. We'll begin with their stealth tech, which Corvids aren't particularly excellent in. The most popular Corvid skins are either Jet Black or Piebald, neither of which grant the user that strong of a stealth bonus. In fact, in snowy areas, Jet Black feathers are actually one of the least effective choices when trying to remain hidden. A dark appearance is most effective as camouflage at night, but crows and other Corvids are not nocturnal builds, so they aren't really gaining this benefit from it. Now, granted, stealth isn't all that important for birds, given how agile and vigilant they are. Plenty of other high-tier birds, like for example parrots, are arguably some of the least stealthy birds in the game, and they do just fine. We could even argue that Corvids are even less stealthy than their black feathers initially appear, as their iridescence actually makes them even easier to see for certain other players, typically other birds. Ultimately, I think it's safe to say stealth is not an important part of the gameplay, at least nowhere near as important as it is for ambush predator builds, like an owl. The main predators a crow needs to worry about are raptors, and because of the raptor's keen eyesight ability, it's unlikely having a higher stealth stat would make much of a difference anyway. Crow's defense and constitution stats are fairly average for a bird, which is to say, not great. Birds have hollow bones, and their feathers offer very little in terms of defense. The feathers do absorb some blunt force damage, but when it comes to slashing and piercing damage, it's nearly useless. And because of their hollow bones, which make them more vulnerable to blunt force damage, the benefit there kind of cancels out as well. Snakes, cats, raccoons, raptors, and dogs all have a high chance of taking the crow out in one hit, so they cannot let their guard down when interacting with any damage to your abilities. Given that their playstyle necessitates taking some risk, crow players definitely wish they had more room for error. Thankfully, their next stat makes it pretty easy to avoid damage. The crow's mobility is a little above average for a mid-sized bird, just to say, excellent. Birds in general are just extremely agile, both on the ground and in the air, and extremely hard to land an attack if they see you coming. Some bird builds, like geese and junglefowl, require significant startup in order to get airborne, meaning that they can't rely on their flight to escape danger if the danger is already right in front of them. crows are not one of these bird builds, and in contrast, the startup on their flight move has some shockingly broken frame data, and allows them to quickly and easily reposition themselves in basically any direction through space almost instantly. This makes their ability to dodge attacks one of the best in the entire game, and makes what would normally be fairly dangerous positions, such as right next to a powerful predator, quite safe as long as the Corvid doesn't use any laggy moves. This synergizes well with the Corvid's combat moveset, as we'll discuss in a moment. Corvids are blessed with many high stats, but power is not one of them. For ability damage is one of the weakest in their weight class, as their only attack option is a simple pecking strike. This move has quick startup and very little end lag, but its damage is egregiously low. Simply attacking with this move will deal minimal damage to anything larger than set. Most players will be able to ignore this attack's damage. However, this doesn't mean a crow's attacks are useless. It just means they've got to be clever about how to use them. A well-placed peck can provoke an attack, and if you're able to move out of it enough, the enraged player will end up being forced to lash out at whoever just happens to be nearby, and create an opening for the Corvid player to capture an objective, steal some loot, or escape trouble. It might seem like a giant strategy. Really, this is the bread and butter of Corvid gameplay, and can lead to massive swings in advantage. The chance to inflict the enraged status effect scales with the user's intelligence stat, so the reason this strategy works so well is that the Corvid's intelligence stat is ridiculously high for a non-primate build. Corvids are tied with parrots for the highest intelligence stat in the entire AU faction. And in addition to enabling the Goading Strike moveset, having high intelligence grants Corvids access to a lot of other powerful techniques too, including the ability to use tools. Tool use is one of the most notoriously powerful abilities in the entire game. In crows, this is no less true. By using hook-shaped wooden sticks, crows can score kills on grubs that are normally safe from everything except for woodpecker attacks. And given how many expensive niche perks woodpeckers need to spend into in order to perform these sorts of drilling attacks, the ability to bypass all of that investment while still gaining the same rewards is a huge boon to the crows. But high intelligence has far more benefits than just allowing crows to copy the success of hyper-specialized builds. Arguably the most important benefit is team tactics. This is what allows baboons to fight off lions, what allows ants to bring down tarantulas, and what allows wolves to prey upon bison. When crows work together, they can capture territory and control points of interest that would otherwise be helpless to defend. They could rescue each other from what would otherwise be guaranteed lethal attacks, using a tactic called mobbing. Mobbing is a strategy most commonly seen in birds, consisting of bombarding a single target with a barrage of both physical and sonic attacks. On their own, it's to shrug off, but that can switch that from all directions at once. It inflicts heavy physical and psychic damage. This is what allows social corvids, like magpies and crows, to successfully chase away predators several times their size. Ravens, on the other hand, tend not to really need the help, as they're large enough to handle most opponents one-on-one, but can still team up in order to lock down a good source of carry-on. Alternatively, they may even ally themselves with wolf players, leading them to a carcass and letting them do the work fighting off their competition before sharing in the rewards. Anyway, that's a basic overview of the Corvid build. Now, let's talk about their matchups. The Corvid matchup chart is heavily dependent on how effective their Goading Strike and mobbing techniques are against a given target. Luckily, because of how high the Corvid's intelligence stat is, the list of targets Goading Strike works against is quite long. Best against wolves with lower intelligence stats. Things like vultures, things like reptiles, and things like... What's more, this technique is on one of its two primary threats, feline builds. Deadly as cats are, they're often quite reactive and easily aggro, so Goading Strike is the perfect tool to redirect their ferocity. This move is admittedly less effective against the Corvid's other main concern, raptors. However, thankfully their mobbing technique is quite effective against raptors, so for both of their main threats, the crow players have options. The only builds these techniques aren't that effective against are other high-intelligence builds, such as monkeys and parrots. Because of their extremely strong social bonding and top-tier intelligence stat, parrots are highly resistant to psychic damage and not turn on each other easily. In fact, when pestered by a Corvid, they are likely to defend each other with more powerful beats and louder shrieks. One-on-one, they're fairly even matched, so it tends to just come down to size. Groups, Corvids tend to have difficulty forcing parrots away from an objective. As for monkeys, their higher HP allows them to more easily ignore the pecking attacks of a crow, and they're used to getting their tails tugged all the time by their own party members, so a crow doing it is unlikely to provoke a passionate response. Crows and parrots have an interesting dynamic. I've said in previous videos that I believe parrots to be the more viable build. They have higher dexterity with their beaks, their sonic shriek attack is incredibly effective. They're more social, and arguably more intelligent. And yet, of the two most intelligent bird builds, there's no denying that in city life, corvids are much more successful. I think the reason for this is that even though parrots are indeed more powerful on their own, and are better at using most tools than crows, crows are better at using the most important tool, other players. From provoking attacks and redirecting aggression, using passing vehicles to deal damage for them and unlock high value. Corvids are the best of the best when it comes to using other build strengths to cover for their own shortcomings. And if the human build's dominance is any indication, co-opting the strengths of less intelligent builds is one of the strongest strategies you could possibly execute. And it's for this reason that corvids sit proudly in S tier. Speaking of builds with a high success rate in City Vibe, another creature that thrives in cities is the centipede. Their quick, twitchy movement and flat shape have no trouble meeting all the nooks and crannies common urban environments. This is the subject of my next video, which will be on YouTube in a month or so. However, if you want to video right now, to sit a month in advance on Nebula, the sponsor of today's video. Now, many of you have heard me talk about Nebula before. It's the creator-owned platform with no ads, no algorithm, no paid, and phenomenal content. But this time is different.
I feel like we should stop.
To dramatically improve its UI, to make Nebula's premium content easier to find. And
Pretty sure we'd get attacked by like the big armed monkey enemies if I kept going.
Hey look, it's the science category. And who's on top? That's right, it's my original series, Let's Play Outside, an educational show spotlighting the individual lives of interesting animals, done in the style of a Let's Play livestream. One of the episodes I'm most proud of features the mantispid, a fascinating insect that has the characteristics of both a wasp and a mantis. How does it fare against other common garden insects? Well, you'll just have to check it out to see. I doubt many of you know this exists. It has been sort of hard to find on Nebula before, despite being exclusive to the platform. But now I really hope you give it a watch. One of the other new categories on Nebula is news, which I find really helpful given how complicated geopolitics tends to be lately. Specifically, they have its new current events show called The War Room, which is made by the same talented people behind real-life lore and modern conflicts. Much like how the monkey's intelligence helps it avoid being used as a pawn in the crow's plan, knowledge about the defining geopolitics of our time is important to know about so that you are not provoked into a battle that you don't understand. But on a more fun note, one show I've been really enjoying is Archaeology Quest, a show where scientists compete to see who can master the art of Paleolithic survival first. If this all sounds good to you, you can sign up to Nebula using my link at nebula.tv/Tearsu, or use the link below, which supports me directly and gets you all this amazing content for 40% off if you choose the annual plan, which adds up to as little as $2.50 a month. Thank you all so much for watching, thanks again to Nebula for sponsoring this video, and as always, good luck out there.
Let me show you something unbelievable. Name a random number between 1 and 100.
61.
Okay, that's pretty random.
Name a random number from 1 to 100. Random.
43.
43. Thank you so much.
56. 7. I want the most random number between 1 and 100, like totally random.
37.
79.
79. Thank you so much.
91.
3.
37. 37. Why 37? Oh, that's not like actual one. 44. 27.
37. 72. 4. 15.
7. 37.
Really?
59. Merci. 13.
7. 37. 37. 73.
35. 37.
37. No way!
42. 37. I knew you were gonna do it! It was 37 and walked away.
Between 1 and 100.
Okay. 37.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. 83. 37. 37.
97.
55. 37. 37. Oh, let me shake your hand.
I wouldn't have thought you were putting in 77.
You were kidding me.
Are you real? Did we ask you this already?
Random number between 1 to 100.
37.
37. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Name a random number between 1 and 100.
Are you kidding me?
What? Good number? I guess. Heavy number. Where did that come from? Imagination, I suppose. So, what's going on? Well, people are actually really bad at selecting things randomly. In fact, when asked to pick a color and a number, people reliably select blue and 7 the most across dozens of different cultures. Psychologists have a name for this pattern, the blue 7 phenomenon. And when
Creative.
a number between 1 and 100, it has long been suggested that the equivalent of the blue 7 phenomenon is the number 37. My producer Emily and I spoke to hundreds of people to test this theory. The most common answer was 7, but maybe that's because people just expected that we'd ask them for numbers between 1 and 10. The most common 2-digit number really was 37, much to our surprise. So we decided to embark on the biggest investigation
I already watched a similar video like this. Guess what number I picked when they started the video by asking me a number. I said 37.
Because it turns up so much. How many objects are there here in the room with us that have a 37 on them? I'm sure there's more than 1,000 here. I built the 37 website in 1994. I started getting email from strangers who were trying to collect them all. We're tireless. The tireless cabal of 37 people. Yeah. Apparently, people choose 37 so reliably that there's even a widespread professional magic trick that relies entirely on getting an audience member to just pick 37 out of thin air. It's called the 37 Force.
I ask you to pick
What?
a number in a moment, okay? It's a 2-digit number. It's less than 50. Both numbers are odd but different. You could have 19, 17, or 15, but not 11. So those numbers are the same. 1 and 1 next to one another. You ready? 1, 2, and 3. What number did you think of? 37. Fascinating.
In the famous Stanford MIT jargon file, The Origin of Hacker Slang, 37 is given as the random number of choice for computer programmers. When groups of people are polled to pick a random number between 1 and 100, the most commonly chosen number is 37. The thing is, no formal polls on this actually exist. The best we found was a Reddit poll of 1,380 people from 4 years ago. And the most popular number was 69. But after that, the winning number was 37. But we can do better than a sample size of just 1,000 people. So we conducted the largest random number survey ever. In a community post 3 weeks ago, we asked people to pick a random number between 1 and 100. We received 200,000 responses. Here are the results as they came in. It's fascinating to watch how consistent these supposedly random numbers are. From 10,000 to 100,000, all the way up to 200,000 respondents. The distribution barely changes, suggesting that people from all around the world think about random numbers in a particular way. And it is decidedly not random. Ignoring the extremes of the scale, because people were primed by the numbers 1 and 100 in the question itself, and ignoring 42 and 69 because they're not random, there are a few numbers that stand out, which we seem to regard as more random than the rest. 7, 73, 77, and
A
37.
lucky coin quest again? This seems familiar.
Then we asked people to pick the number they thought the fewest others would pick. The goal was to get rid of favorite or lucky numbers and get truly random selections. And here, the results were even clearer. Again, ignoring the extremes and 50 in the middle, the most selected numbers were far and away 73 and 37, which were nearly tied. The actual least picked number in the first question was 90, followed by 30, 40, 70, 80, and 60. Multiples of 10 apparently don't seem that random. The most picked overall numbers, ignoring the outliers, were 73 and 37. Ironically, all this evidence points to 37 and its inversion, 73, as not being random at all. So why does everyone pick them? Well, one argument is that this is just how people perceive randomness. 37. Does that feel random to you?
Yeah. It does.
Yeah, 50 wouldn't be random.
No. It would be too,
Yeah?
it's too sensitive.
I think people think that even numbers are less random than odd numbers.
5 feels not random. 9 and 1 feel too extreme, so people tend towards 3 and 7.
This is backed up by the fact that every one of the top numbers in our survey consisted of 3s and 7s. In fact, 3 and 7 were the most selected digits on both questions. But there's also a mathematical case for humanity's number of choice, because it's not just odd numbers, but specifically primes, which feel like the most random numbers. Notice how we ignore odds ending in 5s, or how something like 39 still feels a little less random than 37. Primes feel random for at least 2 reasons. First, they don't appear as much in our lives. Pixel counts, group boxes, square footage. We live in a composite world with multiple dimensions that multiply together, so we just don't see primes much past the single digits. Second, we don't have a formula for primes. If you have a prime number and you want to find the next one, you have no choice but to check every number until you find a prime. The closest thing we have to a formula is the prime number theorem, which gives the approximation that the nth prime number occurs around n times natural log of n. For example, the 1000th prime number should be around 6,908, and it's close, but certainly not exact. So primes essentially occur at random. But of all the primes, 37 has reason to stand out. If we were to find the prime factors of every number, we would see that 2 is the smallest prime factor for exactly half of them, all of the even numbers. And 3 is the smallest prime factor for a sixth of all numbers, anything that's divisible by 3 but not by 2, and so on. As we pick larger and larger primes, they form the smallest prime factor for fewer and fewer integers. But what if
all I want is feeling,
smallest prime factor of each number? Well, first we have 3, which is the second prime factor
might
of a
be
number,
the best
only when the
choice
number is
compared
divisible
to
by both 2
Liana,
and 3,
who's healing
divisible by 6.
is technically
So
better, but
of all numbers,
also
a second prime
she's just
factor
more
of 3.
expensive to use.
And as we keep going, which number will end up at the balancing point? This is the median second prime factor of all numbers from 1 all the way up to a Google and off to infinity. Do you believe that that number is 37?
Let's put her in front so she can attack.
Let's take a look at 5. 5 is the second prime factor only when a number is divisible by 5
It
and
might
3,
be stupid.
but not 2. Or 5 and 2, but not 3. In the first case, a number divisible by 5 and 3 means it's divisible by 15, so that's 1/15 of all numbers. But it also
Boy, do I
can't be
love
divisible
being
by
stupid.
2, so half of 1/15 is a 30th of all numbers. In the second case, a number divisible by 5 and 2 means it's divisible by 10, but it cannot be divisible by 3, so we're left with 1/10 times 2/3 equals 1/15 of all numbers. Adding up these two cases, we get that 1/10 of all numbers have 5 as their
She
second
should have
prime
an ability that...
and we can repeat this for the
Yeah.
next prime, 7. Just take each of these cases and add them
Since
up.
when were you level
All
28?
integers have a second prime factor.
Here I
of
thought I
7,
was gonna have to
and
grind.
so on. Keeping a running total, we quickly approach a balancing point for the second prime factor across all integers. And then we reach it. So the median second prime factor of all numbers is 37. Half of numbers have a second prime factor of 37 or less. There are other remarkable qualities about 37 as a prime. It's an irregular prime, a Cuban prime, a lucky prime, a sexy prime, a permutable prime, a Pac-Man prime, and at this point mathematicians might just be making up types of primes.
37's identity as a prime number is so strong that the same day I first learned the number 37, I learned it was prime. This was one of my first books as a toddler. It teaches you every number from 1 to 100 with a short story or fun fact for each. So for 26, that's how many letters in the alphabet, or for 30, they give the days of September, or for 52, that's how many cards are in a deck. Except 37. It's a prime number. Nothing goes into it. Someday, you'll understand. I did not like that. I understood every other number, so I also wanted to understand 37. So, that number has nagged me ever since, and now this video is being made some 20 years later. 20 years later.
Not convinced yet?
If you take a number better than
Okay.
37 already, like 1369, that's 37 squared, and then you reverse it, and then you stick a 0 in between every digit, then that number is a multiple of 37. And I literally spent the next month on the bus trying to prove that fact, which I finally did. Just rattle off a 6-digit number. Tell me any 6-digit number.
413625.
It's not really the world truth. So how did I figure that out? There's a trick for that.
Is this your party trick that you can bring out?
Surprisingly, it doesn't impress as many people as you would think. I think it should impress everybody.
But there's also a practical reason 37 is an important number for humanity. Say you're faced with a choice that is both immediate and final, like whether to rent the apartment you just toured, or whether to accept a job offer you received. Or it can be as small as whether to stop the next gas station on a road trip. These are all problems where you can't assess all the options at once, and then decide. With each option you encounter, you need to decide whether to accept it or reject it forever, and see what comes next. In these scenarios, it feels impossible to make the best choice. If you select too early, you'll probably never even see the best option. But if you select too late, well then you probably rejected the best option already. So your best bet is somewhere in the middle. There you know at least some information from the options you've seen, and you have some choice to select or pass. But how do you know exactly when to decide? The optimal strategy looks like this. First, you need to see some options and reject them automatically, just to learn what's out there. And then, at a certain stopping point S, you need to stop rejecting them and start evaluating whether an option is the best you've seen so far. If it is, then select it. But when should that stopping point be? We need to work out which stopping point maximizes our chances of picking the best option. We can calculate these chances. For each spot, find the probability that the best option is located there, times the probability we get there from stopping point S. Then add these probabilities up across every spot. Now, the chance of the best option being in any spot is just random. If there are n options in total, it's 1 over n. But it's a little harder to find the chances of getting to each spot. Say the best option is in the next spot after s plus 1. What are the chances we get there? Well, since this is the next spot over from the stopping point, we have a 100% chance of getting there, so we're guaranteed to visit it and select it. But if the true best option is in spot s plus 2, well, there's a small chance we'll miss it. If the best of all the previous options is sitting in spot s plus 1, we would just pick that and stop looking before reaching s plus 2. There's a 1 in s plus 1 chance of this happening. So the chances we do get to spot s plus 2 to pick the true best option is 1 minus that, or s over s plus 1. This same calculation continues up until the last spot n. We only get here if we've been passing on every option so far, which means that one of the first s options must have been the best of the total n-1 options we've seen. In total, this gives us the expression 1 over n times 1 plus s over s plus 1 plus s over s plus 2, and so on all the way up to s over n minus 1. Factoring out the s, the sum inside the parentheses approximates the function 1 over x, going from s to n. Taking that integral, we get the natural log of n over s. So the probability we select the best option is s over n times the natural log of n over s. To maximize this probability, we can find the peak of this function by setting its derivative to 0. And this gives the natural log of s over n equals negative 1. So s over n equals 1 over e, or about 37%. So explore and reject 37% of options just to get a sense of what's out there. And then pick the first option to come along that's better than all of the ones you've seen so far. And your chances of success using this method are also 37%. This math question is known as the secretary problem or the marriage problem, as it also applies to hiring the best employees or even deciding on the best life partner. Now, it can be impractical to check 37% of the options because you don't always know how many candidates are out there. But the 37% rule also works for time. So if you want to get married, say, in 10 years, then spend the first 3.7 years seeing what's out there, and then select the next person who's better than anyone you've seen. So 37 is actually important to our lives, and people seem to subconsciously recognize this. We gravitate towards the number everywhere.
Seconds.
37 years. 37. 37.
How many? 37.
37 hours.
Destroyed 37 restaurants. 37? Oh, 37!
37 interlocking bronze gears. 37 years old. 37 prototypes.
Free full heal.
This collection of images, everything you're seeing on screen, has been collected by one man over the course of his life. And you already know who it is.
It's just fun, right? The whole thing is just fun. How many objects are there here in the room with us that have a 37 on them? This is probably on the order of 4 digits, I'd say.
I don't like opening air cons in the morning.
But I'm sure
It's just not my thing.
Green granola bars. It's a 37-inch yardstick. It's just some political cartoon.
Yeah.
There's no reason that guy had to have jersey number 37.
Didn't seem like it was useful.
Check ko lang.
Sure.
Hokaniどうするのだ? 気をつけるように. Nani ka you ka? そうか。
いらっしゃい。なんじゃ、お主たちか。何にするのじゃ？装備を変えるのかや？装備を変えるのかや？さてさて、何のご用かの？今後ともよろしく頼むぞ。はあ、どこにしまったかな。記帳するぞ。どうするの？